The door of my workshop blew off its hinges before I even heard footsteps. I dropped my wrench and spun around, heart slamming against my ribs, expecting raiders or a hull breach, or worse. Instead, I found 4 armored figures filling the doorway, taller than any human, skin the color of wet slate, eyes like burning coals. Their weapons were not pointed at me, yet, but the message was clear. "Are you Callum Ward?" one of them asked, voice grinding like metal on stone. I nodded, because my throat had locked shut. "You will come with us, now." I did not get a chance to grab my jacket. I did not get a chance to say goodbye to anyone. They marched me straight through the station corridors, past frightened traders who pressed themselves against the walls, until we reached the docking clamp where a war cruiser sat locked onto our station like a predator gripping its prey. The hull was black, scorched from old battles, etched with symbols I did not recognize. My stomach dropped the moment I stepped through the airlock. I was certain I was about to die for a mistake I could not even remember making. They led me down corridor after corridor, past soldiers who stared at me like I was some kind of insect that had wandered into their nest. Every one of them wore the same crest, a curved blade wrapped around a burning star. Finally, the guard stopped in front of a massive door and it slid open with a hiss. The room beyond was dim, lit by a soft red glow, and at the center of it stood a figure who made every hair on my body stand up. She was tall, regal, wrapped in dark armor etched with gold, and her eyes locked onto mine the second I entered. I had never seen anything so beautiful and so terrifying at the same time. "You are the human they spoke of," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was an edge underneath it, like a blade wrapped in silk, the one who repairs what cannot be repaired. I swallowed hard. I fix things. That is my job, yes. She studied me for a long moment, then turned and lifted something from a pedestal behind her. It looked like a weapon, sleek and curved, made of a strange dark metal that seemed to drink in the light around it. Threads of faint blue energy pulsed weakly along its surface, like a heartbeat struggling to continue. "This is Ashcrown," she said. "It has been passed through my bloodline for 11 generations. It chose me the day I was born, and it has never failed me, until 3 days ago." She held it out. I did not move. "Take it," she commanded. My hands shook as I stepped forward and lifted the weapon from her grip. It was heavier than it looked, warm in a way that no metal should be warm, like it was somehow alive. "My own engineers say its soul has been wounded," she continued, her voice tightening with something close to grief. "They say it cannot be fixed. They refuse to touch it further, afraid of angering ancestors long dead." I turned the weapon over in my hands, running my fingers along a seam near the base. Something inside me, some old instinct built from years of patching broken engines with spare parts and stubbornness, told me this was not magic, this was mechanical. "Give me a workbench," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice came out. "And give me time." She studied me again, longer this time, like she was trying to decide whether I was foolish or brave. "Perhaps both. You have until the next sunrise cycle. If you fail, you will be returned to your station unharmed. If you damage it further, you will not be so fortunate." I nodded, because there was nothing else to do. They brought me to a small chamber with a metal table and a set of tools I did not recognize, alien instruments shaped for hands larger than mine. I asked for my own kit instead, the battered case I always carried, filled with tools older than some of the soldiers guarding me. They looked at each other, confused, but brought it anyway. I sat down, took a breath, and got to work. The first thing I noticed was that the weapon was not broken in the way they thought. There was no curse, no wound in some mystical sense. There was corrosion, plain and simple, built up along a coupling deep inside the casing, a spot so small and so overlooked that no one had thought to check it. It was the kind of failure that came from trusting a system too much, letting it repair itself for years without ever opening it up to look inside. It was, in other words, a very human mistake. The kind we made constantly, and the kind we had learned, through centuries of hard lessons, to always check for anyway. The door opened behind me and I nearly dropped my tools. It was her, the Queen. She pulled a chair close and sat down, watching me with sharp, unblinking eyes. "You do not have to stay," I said carefully. "I want to see," she replied simply. So I explained as I worked, narrating each step out loud, partly to keep my hands steady and partly because she seemed genuinely interested. I told her about the corroded coupling, about how the self-repairing systems inside the weapon had been quietly failing for years without anyone noticing, patching symptoms instead of the real problem. She listened closely, asking sharp questions that told me she understood far more about engineering than her own technicians had given her credit for. At one point, she reached over and handed me a smaller tool before I even asked for it, as if she had been paying that much attention. Hours passed. My back ached, my eyes burned, but I kept going, piece by piece, stripping away corrosion, cleaning contacts, rebuilding the tiny coupling with a spare alloy pin from my own kit, one I had carried for years without ever imagining it would end up inside an alien queen's ancestral weapon. Finally, I reached the moment of truth. The biolock, the part of the weapon designed to respond only to her bloodline. If I power this wrong, I said quietly, it might read my hands as a threat. I do not know your customs well enough to guess what that means. It means a challenge, she said, her voice suddenly tight, a claim against my line. I froze. Then maybe you should be the one to close this last connection. She nodded, and I guided her hands carefully, showing her exactly where to press, exactly how much pressure to apply. Her fingers were steady despite the tension in the room. I stepped back, held my breath, and watched. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the blue lines along the weapon flared bright, pulsing in perfect rhythm, and a low hum filled the room, steady and strong, like a heartbeat finally restored. The queen gasped, staring down at Ashcrown as it recognized her completely, for the first time in days. The door burst open and guards rushed in, weapons raised, only to freeze the instant they saw the glowing weapon in her hands. One by one, they dropped to a knee. I did not understand at first why the reaction was so intense. It was only later that I learned the truth. Ashcrown was not just a weapon. It was proof of her right to rule. A queen who could not draw her ancestral weapon could be challenged for her throne by any rival, with enough ambition. Without it, her entire fleet had been standing on the edge of chaos, waiting for the first crack to appear. I had not just fixed a broken tool. I had saved her crown. She turned Ashcrown over once in her hands, testing its weight, watching the light dance along its edge, before finally looking up at me. There was something different in her eyes now, something that had not been there when I first walked into the room. Not fear, not suspicion, something closer to wonder. No one has ever done this, she said quietly, not for me. I just followed the wiring, I said, trying to keep my voice light despite the pounding in my chest. She crossed the room before I could react, closing the distance between us in 2 quick steps, and pressed her lips against mine. The room went utterly silent. I heard someone behind her draw in a sharp breath. My mind went completely blank, every thought I had scattering like startled birds. She pulled back after a moment, calm and composed, as if nothing unusual had happened at all, though my heart was still trying to climb out of my chest. It is an old custom, she explained, noticing my stunned expression. Rarely used now. A declaration that you are under my protection, marked by my own hand. No soldier in my fleet will ever raise a weapon against you after this, human or not. I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. Behind her, every guard in the room had lowered their eyes respectfully, refusing to look directly at either of us, as if witnessing something sacred. Later, they escorted me back to the docking clamp, back through the same corridors I had walked in fear only hours before. This time, though, soldiers stepped aside as I passed, some bowing their heads slightly. The queen walked beside me the entire way, Ashcrown resting easily at her side, humming softly with renewed life. At the airlock, she turned to face me one final time. You will return, she said. It was not a question. I suppose I will, I answered, still trying to process everything that had happened in the span of one long night. The airlock closed behind me, and I stood alone in the familiar corridors of my own station, surrounded by the quiet hum of ordinary machines instead of ancient alien power. My hands were still shaking, though not from fear anymore. Back home, when someone helps you, you just say thank you. A handshake, maybe a drink, nothing more. Apparently, where she came from, gratitude worked a little differently. I glanced down at my toolkit, still smelling faintly of ozone and burnt metal, and could not help but smile. Some repair jobs you never forget,